We hit 50 subscribers, guys! Hello, it's me again, Maxim Ram. Anyways, today is a very special day because it is the end of school. It is the official end of my school year 2024 to 2025, which means I'll be free on YouTube and in the outside world for at least 2 months, which should be long enough for me to produce maybe a video if I have the motivation. So, as you may know, my YouTube channel has reached over 52 subscribers. I almost said 52,000. So, to all of my subscribers out there, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I really did not think that I would get 52 subscribers in the span of like 3 months since the start of 2025. Yeah. But as I mentioned, or wait, if you've been on my channel and if you've been looking at my community posts, you'll know that I made an announcement that once I hit 40 subs, I would make a special where I would discuss literally every country human ship I can either think of or a country human ship I could look for. Or I guess, no, every country human ship I could look for. Well, it technically now, well, with me reaching 50 subscribers, it's technically now I now consider it a 52 subscriber special. But nonetheless, here we go. Alright, so the first ship we're going to be looking at is Rus Amy, one of the most popular ships in the Country Humans fandom. And it is the ship between the Russian Federation and the United States. Now, the historical context for this ship, there isn't really too much, but in the human context, in the human context of this ship, it is an enemies to lovers trope, or the ship mostly follows an enemies to lovers trope. In some other cases, Rus Amy follows along the lines of relatability, where basically we're basically in this trope, the theme here is that Russia and America bond over each other despite hating each other over their very tiring duties as superpowers, which I guess it makes sense, but again, in a historical context, there really isn't a lot to go off of. Or really there really isn't a lot to go off of. Apart from some attempted diplomatic negotiations at friendly relations, there never really was friendly relations. The closest it was, however, was during the time of the Russian Empire, when Russia and America held fairly good relations. It wasn't like a lover's relationship. It was a more so of a mutual friendship. This was further bolstered by when America supported the Russian White Army during the Russian Civil War, which also, speaking of the, but, I'm sorry if I am, starting a lot here, but speaking of the Russian White Army and the Russian Civil War, Rus Amy has two other variant ships or subships, which are Tsar Amy, the ship between the Russian Empire and America, and Sov Amy, or the ship between the Soviet Union and America. Now, the ship that technically makes the most sense here would be the Russian Empire ex-America, which is the next ship on our list. This ship is mostly based on the fairly good and friendly diplomatic relationships Russia held with America during its time under the Romanov dynasty. In most examples of Tsar Amy, Alaska is either the son or daughter of Russia and America. Just like in Rus Amy, there are, of course, most of the Tsar Amy, most people interpret Tsar Amy as a sort of gay ship, but in some cases, it's Russian Empire being a female and America being male. And actually, going back to Rus Amy, as I mentioned, most people ship them as a gay ship Russia and America being, well, men. Men. Now, personally, do I support a gay Ruth Amy? No, I absolutely do not. But do I support a female Russia to a male America? Kind of. As long as the ship art is actually genuinely good, then I would like that person's ship. But for the most part, I don't support Russia ex America. I'm sorry. But Russian Empire ex America, I mean, I guess it could work. But at the same time, it's mostly a friendship thingy. So, yeah. But it's a ship I'm willing to support. And Sov Amy, and as for Soviet Union ex America, not really. It doesn't really make sense because if you account for if you account for the history of most Soviet American relations, they were mostly hostile enemies. From the very start, they actually were because America, as mentioned, supported the White Army in the Russian Civil War, which opposed the Bolsheviks who founded the Soviet Union. And within the former Entente, there was a fear of communism. And that was the same case with America, which is why they didn't even hold diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, at least around until like the 1920s or 30s, I forgot. They were allies during World War II, and then they kind of tried to become allies, or not really allies, but more so just at least friends, around the rule of Mikhail Gorbachev, beginning from 1985. But of course, the Soviet Union collapsed, so that never really went through. Alright, next up, I believe it's time for the next ship on our list, which is UKFR or FRUK, which is the ship between France and the United Kingdom. Now, this ship is pretty accurate, historically speaking, and it is a pretty accurate representation of the enemies to lovers trope. France and Britain were for centuries enemies against each other, as England, or basically the predecessor of the United Kingdom, would claim the French throne for around 100 years, or I think around like 200 years, before they eventually dropped the claim, simply because France slowly kicked them out of Paris and out of the European mainland. Later on, they would continue to fight each other, even as the French monarchist government fell and it was replaced by the Napoleonic government, and England evolved from the Kingdom of Great Britain to the United Kingdom. The two nations still continued to fight each other. During the Congress of Vienna years, there wasn't really anything close to a enemies to lovers relationship either. Apart from, however, though, I will admit, I kind of believe that maybe there was an effort to try and have normal relations, but for the most part, it was mostly just, we don't really care about each other, and yeah. Around the time of the July Monarchy / the Second Republic, relations were, I believe, strengthened with Great Britain, and this was also the case when the Second French Republic became the Second French Empire. And around this time, Napoleon III, who was the emperor of the Second French Empire, tried to normalize relationships. You guys literally almost saw my face. But they tried to normalize relations with Great Britain, or actually the UK. But for the most part, relations were mostly like tense, and they weren't really too friendly. Things did become kind of close, I believe, when the scramble for Africa came. But in the end, for the most part, the two nations didn't really want to touch each other. During World War One, however, things began to take a shift. Because during the First World War, the British sent an expeditionary force of, I believe, around like 1 million troops, or like, I don't know like how many troops, but they sent like around like at least hundreds of thousands of troops into the trenches. And during the French call for help with approaching Paris, apart from the Brusilov offensive caused by the Russian Empire, the British started their own offensive at the Battle of the Somme, where over 60,000 British soldiers died in a single day. Eventually, after the end of World War One, relations between the UK and France slowly strengthened, even though there was still some Anglophobia within France because of colonial and economic, um, what do you call that? Economic and political, oh yeah, competition. Even, because, especially considering that the British Empire reached its height around 1921. And eventually, when World War II came, the British once again did what they did during World War One, sending at least 300,000 British expeditionary forces into the French Republic in an attempt to support it against the German invasion during in May of 1940. However, though, as you all know, the French eventually fell, and the Free French government ended up fleeing to London. However, though, this was where Franco-British relationships, or the Franco-British relationship, once again became strained with the creation of Vichy France, which was mostly seen by the Allies as the legitimate government of France, because the Free French government was mostly formed of officials from the French army or the remainder of the French army that refused to surrender and instead retreated to the colonies in French West Africa. And this and basically within German occupied France, the Vichy French government did actually go on a campaign of Anglophobia, where they basically said that they weren't allies with the UK, especially after the Mers El Kabir incident, where in order to prevent French Navy ships from falling into German hands, the British bombarded the French fleet based at Mers El Kabir in Algeria. I'm not really sure what the Free French government's response was to this. I believe that they were also around the same as the Vichy French government's response, which was one of protest and a sign of betrayal and a feeling of betrayal by the British. Now, after the war, now, actually, no. During the war, there was actually an interesting proposal to unite the UK and France into a single country known as the Franco-British Union. However, though, because of natural fears from France of being dominated by the British, they backed down. The proposal was once again brought up in 1956 during the Suez Crisis, when the British and the French attempted to work together in order to keep the Suez Canal under the control of their countries, of their companies during the time. Because by 1956, Egypt under President Nasser, tried to, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, basically nationalized the Suez Canal away from Franco-British control, or from the control of Franco-British companies. Then, during the Cold War, the two countries were democratic allies who promoted democracy, and basically an expansion of NATO. During this time, the two nations kind of worked together to work. They during the Cold War, the British and the French, despite being allied to the Americans, were also fiercely against the idea of America dominating them or replacing them in the Cold War, which pretty much just came following the Suez Crisis, as the Americans and the Soviets both stepped up to basically tell the UK and France that they were no longer world powers. And today, in the post-Cold War period, the British and the French still maintain close relations, as the two are members of NATO. They were founding members of NATO around like 1949. However, the relationship once again became complex when the UK voted to leave the European Union, even though it was a founding member. To this day, relationships are still mostly close, especially in the face of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and most recently, the Trump administration's concerning alignment with Putin's Russia in Moscow, and the fact that America recently stopped sending supplies to support Ukraine in the war. And personally, do I ship them? Yes. I see them as much of the fandom sees them, enemies to lovers, and I do see that the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England, are the parents of Britain and France, and respectively. And I see them as kind of see them as either liking it or not liking it. But I mostly see England as a little bit more happier than France is for her child. All right, next up we have France x Germany, which is the ship between France x Germany. The historical context for this comes during the formation of the European Union, or actually no, the European Coal and Steel Community around the 1950s. Basically, the European Steel and Coal Community was the predecessor to what would be the European Economic Community, which later became the European Union. Basically, around this time, France and Germany were basically seen as the founding members of the ESCS, even though Italy and the UK were additional founding members. However, though, during the 1950s, France actually sought to reconciliate with West Germany because the president of France basically saw that basically, here's how it went. After World War II, the French president, I forgot his name, in the midst of the Cold War, basically saw the destruction of World War II, and he realized that France and Germany needed to work together for the future, because considering that they were the most powerful countries of the continent. So basically, after West Germany unified, France and West Germany began normalizing the relationship, and it eventually strengthened as the ESCS was later founded. Later on, West Germany became a member of NATO, and even though France pretty much left the NATO's military structure around wait, I'm trying to fix my pen real quick. Around when West Germany joined NATO around the 1950s, there was some concern from France because they thought that Germany would militarize. But other than that, relationships were mostly normal. Then, when the European Economic Community was founded, eventually the two nations doubled down on their relationship. Eventually, the EEC, after 1993, became the European Union, which eventually culminated in many agreements between the two countries, such as the Schengen Agreement, or basically the lack of any border controls between the two, and increased economic partnership. Today, France and Germany are seen as the dual cores of the European Union, and they're basically seen as the founders of it up to the modern day. Now, do I ship France x Germany? Yes. Does that mean am I a multi-shipper because I ship France and the UK and France x Germany? Not necessarily, because they all don't exist in one AU. Rather, I have multiple AUs for all of my ships, well, mostly depending on what ships they are. Alright, next up, we have Germany x Poland, or Gerpol, which is the ship between, Germany x Poland. The historical context comes mostly from the modern day when Poland and Germany both flipped to joining NATO and the European Union, or rather, when Germany reunified and Poland became Western. Basically, West Germany and around the Cold War, the West German and Polish relationship was really harsh, but they weren't nice. Because the thing is, Poland was a satellite state of the Soviet Union at the time, and West Germany was aligned with the West. Seeing as they were aligned with opposite ideologies, the two kind of naturally hated each other. However, the relationship between East Germany and Poland, however, was different. East Germany had a much nicer relationship with Poland, considering that the two were communist allies and were forced allies of the Soviet Union. And also, the East Germans didn't really demonize the Poles, or rather, there was much less anti-Polish sentiment, there was much less anti-Polish sentiment in East Germany than there was in West Germany. Correct me if I'm wrong, by the way. Not all my statements are true. It's basically just based off all of my assumptions. But eventually, after the Cold War, when Poland joined EU and NATO, Germany basically supported them. Today, the two nations kind of have a weird friendship that, even though it's still kind of marred by by historical context, today both Germans and Poles kind of see each other as as much more favorable towards each other, much more than I think any period in their history. Now how do most people see this ship? Well, most people see the ship between Germany and Poland as an enemies to lovers ship. At first, it was kind of really awkward, and then later on, they kind of became friends and eventually lovers. Oh, and I forgot to mention how most of the Country Humans fandom so basically most people portray the EU as either the son or daughter of France and Germany because they kind of are in real life, and they are once again, as previously mentioned, the dual cores of the European Union. Alright, now I have to admit I'm actually getting kind of bored, so I'm sorry if I couldn't mention every ship. Maybe I will create a part 2, but for now, because it's currently the end of the school, hooray, I kind of want to do some other activities, and to be honest, I'm kind of getting lazy, and honestly, I think I may just write a script, because once again, as you're seeing this video, it is unscripted, and I feel like and honestly, my bad language is, it's kind of a demotivating fact. So, with all that being said, I think it's time we end this video. Goodbye, good morning, good night, and good afternoon, wherever you are. And once again, thank you for 52 subscribers. I know it's not a lot, but for me, it is. Like, I can't believe I just got skyrocketed to 50 subs. Will I try to reach 100 subs by the end of the year? Not really, but I'm kind of aiming for at least 60 to 70 subs, and maybe 3 or 1, or at least one video in this year. I will still continue to be posting on my community post. It'll mostly be random, or it'll depend on my mood, but I will mostly be there on my community tab. So if you can spend your time, please look at my community tab more, because that's where I'll mostly be. Or you can try and find me in whatever videos you can find me in, or you can find my comment in. But with all that being said, thank you for watching this video. I'm sorry once again if the dialogue was horrible, but yeah. It is the end of school, and I did promise that I would make a video today. As mentioned in my community tab, please look at that, that post. It was like, I don't know, like 4 days ago. But other than that, well, you just saw my face, frick. But honestly, I'm kind of okay with you guys seeing my eyes, honestly. I just don't want you guys to see my mouth and my nose, because then you'd see how ugly I am. But if you're wondering why I don't just lower the fan, once again, I'm kind of uncomfortable, so I'm kind of willing to just let you guys at least see my eyes, so this is what they look like. If you think I'm cute, thank you. If you think I'm ugly, get out of here. I do not appreciate your unkindness, and I do not appreciate you for bashing me for no reason at all. If you've come here to my channel once again, get out. I don't want to interact with you. But with all that being said, in case I don't see ya, good. Actually, I forgot the line. Hang on. But in case I don't see ya, no. If you don't know what line I'm saying, it's from the Truman Show. It's a really cool movie. Go check it out. But I think the line goes like this. In case I don't see ya, good morning, good evening, and good night. Alright, that's all. See ya, folks. And for those of you who are currently waiting for their vacation, I sincerely hope that it comes very, very early for you, and that the last moments of school aren't as stressful as they were, or aren't stressful for you, because honestly, who wants to go through the stress of school and life? Alright, that's all. See ya.